to the Women in the New World Order session here this afternoon. My name is Yalda Hakim and I'll be your moderator for this panel. I work as a foreign correspondent and anchor for BBC World News. And much of the work that I focus on and the documentaries that I produce are on women and children. I travel to some of the most remote regions of the world, whether it's South Sudan or parts of Iraq and Afghanistan, to really get a sense of some of the issues that women and children and young girls face in these societies. And through my work, I found that around the world, women now have more decision-making power and influence over more aspects of social, political, and economic life than ever before. An example of this is the recent election in Saudi Arabia in December 2015, where women were able to vote for the first time in local government, which really shows the progress that's being made in even the most conservative societies. Having said this, progress is uneven, both across and within regions and countries, and resistance and backlash are common in these societies. In fact, what I found is having more women in political and public positions is important, but that doesn't mean that they have real authority and autonomy, and it certainly isn't associated to economic growth. So, how can women overcome barriers to leadership and influence? We'll be discussing these issues with this great panel that I've got here today. Extraordinary, strong, powerful women, and one man is here for all his sins. They're all incredible in all the fields that they work in, to talk to us more about how they make the world a more productive place and deal with gender inequality issues. As our speaker just mentioned, we're expecting the Minister for Textiles, Smriti Irani, who will hopefully join us very soon. We've got Admiral Michelle Howard, who's the Commander, Allied Joint Force Command Naples, Commander US Naval Forces Europe, and Commander US Naval Forces Africa. We've got with us Sakena Yacoobi. She's the CEO of the Afghan Institute of Learning in Afghanistan. And our sole male on the panel, I'll try not to give him too hard a time, is Pramit Pal Chaudhuri, who's the foreign editor of the Hindustan Times. I'd like to ask each of our panelists to just open up with some opening remarks, to speak for about 4 or 5 minutes about the roles that they have in changing the world. And many of the people on this panel are already at the table. They're at decision-making roles and they influence change in their field. So I'd like to learn a little bit more. Can I start with you first, Admiral Howard?
All right, thank you, Ms. Hakim. And first I want to thank the Observer Research Foundation and India's Minister of External Affairs for being such gracious hosts and for inviting me to join you today. So when you think of Navy, I'm sure you think of ships and submarines and perhaps, in my case, aircraft carriers. I wanted to start by talking about a branch of my service that is perhaps lesser known. We have in the Navy U.S. divers, and they're a highly specialized community. They're capable of conducting underwater construction and demolition, underwater search and rescue, as well as routine ship restorations and repairs. And they also provide technical expertise to special ops and amphibious missions when required. And obviously, a group of people like this go through rigorous training. There's one individual I'd like to highlight. And among my service, a senior enlisted is referred to as a chief. So Navy diver Chief Jones graduated first in a dive class of 25 people. And Chief Jones can swim 500 meters in under 12 minutes, perform 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, which is double our minimum, and can run 1.5 miles in under 12 minutes. And then all of this is done in a span of 45 minutes. And Navy diver Chief Jones is one of our best, brightest, capable, and cool-headed. But Navy diver Chief Rebecca Jones is one of the Navy's few women divers. And when I put it in context, the Department of Defense put the Navy's active duty enlisted ranks at just over, all of our sailors, at just over 323,000. And across officers and enlisted, women in my service make up about 18% of the Navy. Navy Community Chief Jones and other women like her make up about 1% of the dive community. which was a pretty select number. But how did we get here? Well, about 2 decades ago, in 1993, the combat exclusion policy was lifted in my country, allowing women in aviation and women in the Navy to be able to serve in combat. And then 20 years later, the Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, announced the full cancellation of the combat exclusion law. And as the Navy has opened more positions to women since the repeal of this policy, we still continue to have first. Our first women were placed on submarines 4 years ago. And with the latest policy announcement, I expect someday we might see the first woman Navy SEAL, so G.I. Jane won't be just a movie. The military isn't alone as an occupation where women are less than 50% of the workforce. And in my country, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, women make up only 5.9% of firefighters, 2.7% of construction workers, and only 8.3% of mechanical engineers. And so what we are often faced with, what's the right number? 1%, 18%, 2.7%? And that question generally is asked for all jobs. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg may have an answer. She's often asked, when will there be enough women on the U.S. Supreme Court? And she has famously answered, 9. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Supreme Court in the United States, there are only 9 positions. So people are sometimes shocked by that answer. But I love her reasoning when she follows up with a statement, there's been 9 men, and nobody's ever raised a question about that. So there is another example where 100% might be the right answer. Just as there are 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices, it's been 9 years since the first rotation of an all-female force protection unit, which was sent by India to aid the United Nations mission in Liberia. And one of the India FPU commanders, Colonel Bala, said, when the local women see the female peacekeepers, they get inspired by them. I believe this is true. I also believe it's vitally important for people to have mentors and role models that they can relate to, that they have someone that they see made the way, and they know they have a path they can follow. Now, when you look at the female peacekeepers in India, it's hard to quantify their contributions, but in terms of women, prior to their rotation, women made up about 6% of the security forces. 9 years later, it's 17%. And I don't think that can just be a coincidence. So I've talked about these numbers, 1% and 100%. But I want to leave you with one notion. You can't place a specific number on statistic on what is the right number of women in a career. The truly important thing is that all of us, regardless of our race, our gender, our religious views, have the opportunity to be successful. When that happens, the best performers rise to the top, and when that happens, we have the best and most capable team. So meritocracy, when that happens, what a new world order that will be. Thank you.
Thank you. I must say, I'm frightened of Chief Jones and all her push-ups. She sounds extraordinary.
She's fantastic.
Sure. We've just got the minister who's just arrived. Hello. Minister, we're just doing our opening remarks. We've just heard from Admiral Michelle Howard and telling us about some extraordinary women in the Defence Force. But you've worked in television, you're now in politics, you're at the table as well, you're part of the decision-making process, and you have a lot of influence. But just tell us about how much of a gap there really is between formal and actual power.
How do you define power? For me, administratively, power means the responsibility and having a pathway of implementing a policy which will affect irrespective of gender, every class and every community in my country. When I look at administration, I do not think of political power as such, because it re-emphasizes itself as responsibility. You know that you have, as a woman, come through various levels of struggles or seen other women deal with challenges. For you, then, that position becomes an opportunity to leave behind a better space for the person who is to follow you next. And because you're a woman, there is somehow an added expectation that you are supposed to be better than the best. So for me, is that a definition of somebody who's powerful, or definition of somebody who has to carry that added burden of proving yourselves to be better than others in the field, just because you are there as a female representative in the whole matrix? When you speak about my journey in media and in politics, I think that the hallmark of my journey has been that I have never seen gender discrimination in the media or in my political organization. The challenge comes through when you're in an administrative position and you're in a position to influence lives. That is where on every front you are measured in terms of your personality and not in terms of how you deliver for your office. So let's say if, in comparison to me, there was another gentleman in a position of power, if they are emphatic about what they want, then they are known as people with a lot of resolve. If you as a female leader are emphatic, then either you are possibly cranky or possibly not as comfortable in a position of power, and hence your discomfort being there is visible in your administrative traits.
So do you
find there are descriptions about female personalities, but that description is never assigned to, let's say, a male counterpart. But that's only in administration. I haven't seen it anywhere else.
Do you find then you have to pick your battles?
Beg your pardon?
Do you find that you have to then pick your battles?
No.
To hold yourself back?
No, I think that battles pick you. And you don't pick battles. But I've always been of the opinion, come all and bring all. Because I've never used my gender as a crutch. So I have never projected a position where I've said that I should be spared an onslaught only because I'm a woman, or people should be kinder in their response only because I'm a woman. And I think that that is one of the first steps towards having that balance in terms of gender. Because even men that I work with possibly would have more respect for a female counterpart if they would not project their gender as a tool to get either more access towards some equation within the power system, or for that matter, even public space. So because I have led that kind of a life, I think that, like I said, you don't pick the battles come to you and you fight every day and you almost win every day.
Well, let's go to the grassroots level and speak to Dr. Yacoobi, who works with and represents so many women across Afghanistan in 13 provinces, you told me. One of the things that you pointed out was education is the key. In order to have these sorts of powerful positions, women need to have access, or girls and children need to have access to a solid foundation.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. First of all, I would like to thank the Research Center for giving me this opportunity to be here. And also I would like to thank the government of India, because this is an excellent opportunity for me to raise the voice of the women of Afghanistan. Yes, I really believe strongly that education is the main key issue for really empowering women in different areas, especially when you work in a country that have been in 40 years in war. And the women have been abused over and over. And they have been refugees all over the country. And also they lost every dignity, every confidence, every ethics, and every responsibility that they had, even a little. And so how you are going to empower those women? I really believe that the first step is to really give them education. What kind of education? And I strongly, again, believe that education just not only reading and writing, a kind of education that really promotes critical thinking. Once you give that type of vehicle to the women, that they really know how to ask questions, how to do critical thinking, then they are on the floor. Then they can thrive and they can really blossom. And I want to tell you a little bit about the situation that I work in Afghanistan. Today, Afghan women are not the same women that they have been there for, let's say, 50 or 60 years ago. Today, the women of Afghanistan are really thriving. They are getting education. Yes, we have a lot of issues still in Afghanistan. It still is very difficult. But the way we are communicating with women and the way that the women get the training, it's different. Because the women understand, know the feeling, how to deal with issue. And the way that the women, when they are empowered, the way that they are dealing with the issue, that they are looking for a solution collectively. They work together, community after community. They make a decision collectively. They work as a group. And when they are in power, people listen to them, and they listen to the people. The people trust them. And so as a result, the women, when they come to the political arena or they come to the private sector as a businesswoman, they are really very, very successful. I want to share this with you because a lot of people feel sorry for the women of Afghanistan. Yes, they are under a tremendous pressure. Yes, they are being, again, still, we have a conflict. But the women of Afghanistan today, they travel to India, they travel to Pakistan, they travel to China, they travel to Iran, and they do commodity, they bring businesses. And also today, I can share this with you that the government of Afghanistan, we have our constitution that almost 37% of our women are in the parliament, and they are sitting on that chair, and really they are making decisions. One thing that we are working with the women of Afghanistan, that really we want them to make a right decision. We don't want them that they got that seat because they are women. So we are trying to train them on political issues such as good citizenship, such as democracy, rule of law, gender equality, human rights, women's rights, and civil society issue. And when we train them in that kind of area, so they are capable to really hold that chair and really act on it as superpower as they could, and they are. And I am so proud of them. I really want to share this today, and I have this opportunity to say that I would request the international community to really back up the women of Afghanistan because they really progress tremendously, and they are suffering a lot. And our government is really trying to help, but our government has so much in his hand that they could not really provide that much opportunity for the women. But as an NGO, that's our task, that's our responsibility, that's our objective, to really reach as many women as we could. And you know, AOL has been reaching almost 13.5 million people in Afghanistan in area of education, training, awareness, and women's rights, human rights, and gender equality. And that is something that really we are proud of it. Yes, we have a huge job still in our hand. Still we are behind because our country, 80% of the people were not able to read and write. And today we have a long way to go. It's a slow process, but the people are really improving their life and they are changing their life. And I really appreciate that I have this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yacoobi. Pramit, I have to ask you, I mean, as our token man on the panel, how much, obviously, do men have to play a role in advancing gender inequality? Because it's not just the responsibility of women.
Yeah, completely. I think one of the key issues that we have to keep in mind is that even when you look at it, even in areas and sociological niches in which all of the laws are in position, all of the educational standards are being met by men and women equally, in societies that are considered extremely egalitarian on gender issues, you still see a predominance of men in most decision-making areas. So, for example, Denmark, which is among the, as most Nordic countries, considered epitomes of gender equality, only 15% of corporate board members are female. And it goes on through, even in countries like Norway and so on. There are areas like Parliament and so on where they are predominant, but broadly speaking, even when all of the other indices and all the legal requirements and so on are fit. So there's obviously a socialization problem here. There are inbuilt social issues that have to be addressed even in the most egalitarian circumstances. So I'll give you a few examples of what I've seen in my own time or what I've heard. One example is, for example, I remember I was talking to the head of a number of big corporations, HR heads, human resource heads of a number of major corporations. And a lot of them were women, and they were saying that one of the problems that they will face with women at senior corporate positions, getting them into that, they said, you don't even realize as a parent that when you have a daughter, that even the mothers and the fathers will insist or should we say project the idea that a woman, a girl should in particular act in a certain ladylike fashion. It's not necessarily, but in the sense that they're expected to avoid confrontational positions, to not get angry, to shout and scream, in a way that males are given a certain degree of leeway in certain circumstances. So they said, in our corporations, we actually have to toughen the young girls who come in. We have to give them special exercises saying, you're in a board meeting, you're negotiating with a difficult customer who is yelling at you, how do you respond? And a lot of the women will say, well, you know, I'll try to be polite and try to calm things down. They said, no, that's not how it works. You've got to respond equally. You've got to confront them because it's a negotiating tactic they're using against you. But it was so deeply socialized in even executive women that they said we had to actually sit down and say, look, this is how men argue with each other. And it's not considered a problem. It's fine. It's the way things are done in certain circumstances. Another anecdote I'll give. I was once talking with an Israeli general about how the Israeli army had once experimented with the idea of using, this is way back in the 60s, I think it was, of using women in combat roles. And he says, you know, we had to abandon that because of a simple problem. When we embedded a female soldier inside a platoon of men and they were advancing on the front line, even in a war game scenario where we were just play acting, if the woman was declared injured, the men refused to advance. The platoon would say, we have to protect the woman. If it was a man, they would have said, go hide behind the bush, here's a machine gun, some grenades, defend yourself, we'll keep advancing as our orders require us to. The female, they would say, we have to protect her, we can't leave her alone. To the point that they would defy orders from their officers. We're not advancing, there's a wounded woman here, it's our job to protect her. So he said we had to give it up because we're literally facing chaos on the front line of it, not because of the women, but because of the men. The men just said this is a social obligation of us to protect this woman. Then another area you have is the question of what anthropologists call male bonding ritual. Men, especially in areas of consultancy positions or where networking is a crucial element in their job, and there's virtually no job in the world where networking is not of some degree of importance. Men tend to fix this by sitting around, having beers together, cracking dirty jokes and doing stuff like this, which they immediately seize up when a female enters the game, because they themselves are reluctant to crack dirty jokes in front of a woman. They're definitely reluctant to act stupid and frat boyish in front of a female. And this automatically puts up a barrier for the female in terms of her networking capacities in most cases, in a male-dominated environment. I remember when I began as a journalist in the first newspaper I worked in, they had just opened the doors for the night shift of the news desk to have women employees. And normally in the night shift of a newspaper, especially in those days in 1980s, this was in Calcutta, used to consist of a lot of alcohol and a lot of screaming and shouting as the deadlines would approach and the presses would start to roll and so on. And a lot of the senior editors felt very uncomfortable with having women around and being able to yell and shout at them the way they did with the men. So they would literally tell them, go home. Okay, don't have to do the night shift. You sign in, pretend you're working, go home, you'll get your salary, but we'll take over, we'll handle your work for you. And it took almost 10 years for the company to break that habit, saying it doesn't matter if they're women, you can still yell and shout and say, you're messing up the deadline, you're making a hash of it. Just ignore the fact that it was female. And it took almost an entire generation of night subs, chief subs, to be retired before we were able to change that culture. So that degree of socialization that exists, even in the most egalitarian structures in the world, is something that will continue to be a problem that in many ways a lot of us will have to change, men will have to change in our own minds, but to some degree even among women as well, as I mentioned, the case of mothers and what they feel their daughters should be like, will have to change as well.
Thank you. You've raised 2 points there that I'd like to put to both the Minister and Admiral Howard. The first one is about, not wanting to leave the female soldier behind. I mean, how much of this is prejudice and sexism that's unconscious? People aren't even aware they're doing it.
Well, I don't even know how to address that. So that's a reinforcement of a theoretical. So in the experience of my country, who's been in combat for the last 15 years, we're well past that. So with operations in Afghanistan and in Iraq, we've had 2 women who are Silver Star recipients. And women have fought daily side by side with our soldiers. And clearly, when you look at the NATO contribution to Afghanistan, there have been women soldiers from 28 contributing nations plus partners on the ground in combat. And women have been wounded, and the units have continued to fight. So we've had women leaders on the ground in units. My first combat experience was in Desert Storm on a ship. It was an integrated ship, and we did our mission. So what happens is we get these stubborn theoretical ideas based on someone's individual experiences. And they are somehow not informed by the reality of what's occurred.
So you're saying they are individual experiences. It's not a cultural problem across the board.
No, because one, our cultures are all different. But if you're talking, depending on the nation and then depending on the culture, what the experience set is with women, then there's going to be the same theoretical expectations and the same learning curve. And I think it gets even harder than that. Because depending on the experience sets of that nation and that military, they can go in and out of gender integration. There's some countries where women were completely integrated into the infantry up through World War II and after World War II, and then in the 60s and 70s, women were withdrawn from the military. So then when they brought women back in the 2000s, they have to relearn how to fight together as integrated units. So the experience sets are valid for each individual and then for each military and each nation. But the theoreticals of once you're out on the battlefield and there's going to be a gender difference. One of my favorite quotes was from about 7 years ago from a staff sergeant in our military, a male staff sergeant. And someone was trying to engage him on this perspective, and he said, he goes, let me be clear. There's no female soldier out here. There's no male soldier out here. There's just soldiers out here.
Fair enough. Minister, another point that Pramit raised there was male bonding. And you've been in a lot of male-dominated environments in the media and in politics. And one of the things I found with a lot of young women is being able to break into that or being able to, break that culture. What sort of advice do you have? Or how have you managed to cope in those types of environments?
I've never tried to conform to a particular code of bonding. When I was in the media business, I was told that as an actor, if you want a job, then the after parties is the place to be. And I never went to any. because I felt that how I do my job, how I deliver on the job, that should matter as to whether I will get another project or not to work in. And to the surprise of many in my industry then, it was found that I did go from one great job to another, which just goes to show that this whole perception that, oh, I need to match you drink per drink to succeed or to have that bond with you, flummoxes me, because I'd rather be chosen for a project or a job just on the basis of how talented I am as compared to whether I can bond with you over a glass of beer. I see the same in politics. I've spent around 16 years in active electoral politics, and even in politics, it has always been about the project that you're given, the responsibility you're given, and how good your job are you at. So because I have not conformed to that boys club or women's club mentality and still made it thus far, I think that my advice to any woman would be just concentrate on how well you can do your job. And I think that's all that matters, at least for somebody who wants to give you another project that they want to assure success in.
Do you think there's an expectation on influential women to take the lead in curbing gender inequality?
I think that we endow that expectation onto ourselves. It is not an expectation actually of people around us, but because of our own journeys and our own struggles, we feel compelled to give back to our gender and to women who are following us, that, okay, if we've not had it easy, then let's at least make your journey better. But the truth of the matter is that everybody has, as the lady here said, everybody has their own set of circumstances, their own communities, their own cultures that they are surviving in. So it is not necessary that my story in my own country can be replicated by another lady. All you can do, I think, which I have seen being helpful to girls, is possibly a kind of an environment where you can do mentorship, where you don't handhold them through everything, but you tell them that if you need some advice or somebody to fall back on or a shoulder to cry on, then I've been there, done that, and I can be that shoulder. And I think that's all women need. Actually, I have seen women succeed from the most difficult of circumstances, and the only respite that they have had is somebody to talk to. That's all that they need.
It's very true. Dr. Yacoobi, in a place like Afghanistan, though, the culture and situation for women is quite different. They need to band together, don't they? They need to come together and support each other.
I really strongly believe that what the minister said, that the women, as they preserve themselves and also as they start to acting on their position, I think that the culture and the tradition is very important, but the community really support them as they see them, they perform. If they see them that submissive, they are not responding to the issue, and then that way the culture is going to, or the tradition is going to be also suppress them. But if they are really acting very powerfully and they know their job, so the community are behind them, because the community can really judge them that if this individual who is taking this position is really working from the heart, if this individual is really taking her responsibility serious, and the community could see that very openly, and they are supporting them. As example is myself. Today I am, I shouldn't say, but I'm a leader. Hundreds and thousands of people with me, and they are all supporting me, and they are behind me. And as a matter of fact, somebody was joking the other day. They said, if I want to run, I can take all the vote if I want to. But I said, no, thank you very much. I am very happy with civil society, what I'm doing. But the issue is that when you really work honestly, sincerely, and perform sincerely, people will follow you.
Do you find young men in Afghanistan also support your progress?
Absolutely. That is, I'm so glad that you asked. There are young men that today are coming to our office. They sit and they have debate with women, young women and young men. They are sitting and have a discussion. They are open-minded. They are thinking differently, although they understand that the culture is sort of, we have an issue. But these young men are completely thinking, they respect women, they support women, they are trying to help them as much as they could, not to just hold them, feel sorry for them. Really, they challenge them. A lot of times they are sitting around the table and they debate and challenge each other. we have a lot of issues. Just please do not take me wrong that the women of Afghanistan is all completely very successful. But the step that we are taking because of the educational issue that we make priority, because of the critical thinking that we make priority, and also because that we want that if somebody is taking a leadership position, they must qualify. And when we put the a qualified individual woman, I think that there is no problem. People understand that they really respect and work with them. That's
Pramit, you're in the media business. I often get quite frustrated when I'm asked the woman question, when I'm asked, you know, how do you deal with such and such a situation as a journalist because you're a woman? Just give us a sense of the media landscape here in India and some of the challenges that I suppose female journalists face, but also some of the progress that's been made and some of the improvements that need to be made.
Actually, I'd argue that media in India is one of the more gender-friendly environments. I work in a newspaper that has, for the past 16 years, which is owned by a woman. So it's been owned it's the second largest media house in the country, and it's completely owned and run by a female. And actually quite a number of the media houses in India have females at the top. That's partly because of the family structure. A lot of these are family owned, so if you are the daughter of a media baron, automatically you inherit. But even, for example, in television and in the newspaper industry, there's a fairly large representation of women. I would argue about 50% of the TV anchors in this country, for example, are women. What I think the challenges for women, from what I can tell, is that one, there's a tendency for some newspapers and reporters, editors, and television stations to argue that certain types of jobs are too dangerous for women. So in war scenarios and so on, there's a reluctance to send a woman. And so, for example, I have been with Indian peacekeeping troops to Sierra Leone, to South Sudan, places like this. And it's always noticeable for me that they don't even ask a female to go. They just assume that this is a dangerous place and they don't want to send a female there. But that's even true in some areas in politics, where they're sort of the badlands of Indian politics, where there's danger out there. There's a tendency, slowly being overcome, because there are a lot of very good political reporters, female political reporters in India who have overcome this. But again, there's a certain reluctance you can see that the editor would prefer to send a male rather than a woman. And then I think in the one area that tends to still be very male-dominated or still skewed in favor of men, should I say, is in the corporate sector, where business and finance, less finance actually, but a lot of, let's say, natural resources industries and so on, you tend to see more of a male presence than you do in other areas.
Interesting. I'd just like to open the floor up to the audience now to take some questions for our panelists. So before I do that, we've got two fellows here who would like to ask some questions. So if I can ask Claire Allenbick first to ask a question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. It was really an amazing panel. I want to ask you two things. First, how do we involve men? Because here we are mainly talking amongst women, except you, of course. And I want to know how, I mean, the UN launched the E4She campaign, and it has a lot of success. But then on our day-to-day life, we don't really see that men are that interested in this topic. So how can we have more men involvement in that? And secondly, when do you see men at power in your respective country? Is it in 10 years, in 20, in 30, in 50 years? Because with the lose of Hillary Clinton, we don't know when this can happen again and when there will be an opportunity for women to rise again at power. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Minister, would you like to answer the question about how do we get more men involved in terms of gender equality and the progress of women?
I think that it is pertinent to note that in her question in itself, she spoke about the He for She campaign. but the limitation of the impact of the campaign because of not being able to reach out to the man at the grassroots, the family man or the everyday person who we would like to see the most impact on with regards to gender equality. And I think that all begins from home. Apart from having a culture of gender equality embedded through our educational system in our workplace, the place to begin with is home. So as gentleman here was talking about reinforcing the spirit of a woman even in a corporate domain, to say it is okay to sit there and negotiate hard, and it would not be looked upon unkindly by others in the room that you're not ladylike enough. I think those problems stem from the fact that we need to fix it, as we call it, in the home setting, where we tell our girls that it is, you know, as much their right to voice their opinions on issues, and when the male members of the family see that interaction with the girls in the family, I think that behavioral changes start from there. The campaigns do have effect, especially in the younger lot, but for an overall societal change, you need to begin with the families.
It's interesting because it comes down to policy on some level as well, doesn't it? Countries like Sweden, for example, have great paternity leave. They encourage men, in fact, to stay at home over their wives or their partners. And so they get a year-long paternity leave. They call them the latte fathers. And so the culture encourages these sorts of shifts and changes as well.
I think that in terms of even the cultural context and how men respond to women in positions of power, that is very evident in the fact that in my democracy, at least, I have seen women in positions as head of state, or, you know, right now, currently the Speaker of our House is a lady. Our External Affairs Minister, who is one of the most prominent ministers in the cabinet, led by the front by Srimati Sushma Swaraj. Commerce Minister is a lady. So I think on many aspects in our country, at least, I'm proud of the fact that we have traveled that extra mile to ensure that we see women in positions of power. But the fundamental change that, you know, we desire, which actually reflects gender equality, my strong belief is, apart from the educational intervention and like the policy intervention that you speak of, fundamental change, where men actually don't shy away from looking after their babies, or even make it a special occasion that they change a diaper, actually begins by, you know, having those conversations in your homes.
I believe the second question that was asked there by Claire was the US election question. I don't know who wants to tackle that one. The general consensus has been that 2016 was not necessarily a good year for women in terms of, you know, the sexist remarks that were made during that campaign. So I think her question was, how long before we do see a female president in the White House? I'm not sure who's willing to answer that question. Do you want to, Dr. Yacoobi?
Yes. Yeah. I really believe that we shouldn't just look at the issue and be afraid of it. First of all, it takes a culture. You know, right now, a lot of time they are comparing like the Asia and with the West, that see how the women are improving their life. And look, this was opportunity for all of us to watch that so many people in advanced country, still they are prejudiced. So as a woman, we must support the women and stay behind them, no matter how much Hillary fell in her position. But still, we are very proud that she ran side by side with her opposite. You know what we want to do? We want to continuously keep going on a different position that we want to choose. Not to be afraid and not to just say, well, because of, as a woman, we might not get that position. We might not run because there are people who are prejudiced against gender equality, and they are doing that. So I think that really we should take the initiative and run for it. And I think we will manage to be successful. Yes, there is the issue, not only, for example, in Afghanistan or India or Pakistan, all over the world. Still the women are being sort of as a second citizen. Still the women are not getting the opportunity that they should get, or getting equal job, or they are getting equal pay. But that doesn't mean that we just stay behind and be afraid. I think that is one of the issues that day to day we are working through education, that really educate the women and also break that traditional and culture from the time that a child is in the preschool. We work and teach them leadership. And once you teach them leadership and responsibility, they will be able to manage themselves and successfully run and compete. And we should do it. That's what I believe. Thank you.
Do you think there's a certain, there's a sort of a level of, a turning point or a momentum at the moment in terms of how women and power are viewed?
Well, I think now is a good opportunity for us. I am talking about Afghanistan. We have opportunity to really get advantage of this situation. But at the same time, today the world is in turmoil. Everywhere is the issue of war, conflict, and women are the front row. And the first thing that they are doing, they are abusing women and children. So that is something that we reach to that time that we really have to stand up. That is my issue. I really feel that we must not afraid, stand in front and show our leadership position. Yes, the time is very bad timing right now, all over the world. But I don't look as a negative issue. I think that women have a chance, and if we give them opportunity, and you will see that they will really be successful. We need opportunity. We need the environment. We need the support of the men. We need the support of each other above all. You know that sometimes women against women are really, that's the issue. That's the big problem, you know, that once they see you in a position that you are in a leadership position, some women become against you, you know. So we must support each other to reach out to that level, you know.
Can I just pick up on that? Because that's often a discussion and debate that's had, that perhaps there isn't a stronger sense of a sisterhood, that other women bring down women.
So there's been a number of studies, and some of the things we've talked about today, we do tend to say and put it in context of he and she, how men view women, and then men is in most of the cultures have the political power. But in reality, it does get back to the family circle and upbringing. In most cultures, the view of women, particularly women as leader, is held by both men and women. So the classic example is when you do talk about behaviors of boys and girls, a boy who's in my country who might be exhibiting leadership traits will be praised. A little girl who's exhibiting leadership traits will be called bossy. It has a negative connotation. And so and that might come from the mom as much as from the dad. Some of that is teaching people to be aware of their own biases, and that understanding that both men and women have these biases. And then once you make people aware of the bias, they will generally change their behavior. The other piece is this concept of family care. In most of our cultures, family care is still predominantly the responsibility of women. And so the bias that has to change is, you pointed out a Scandinavian country, when governments believe that family care is the responsibility of society, vice just the family. And then when you make it the responsibility of society and break it out of the gender bonds, and then you allow women to contribute in different occupations, that becomes an economic engine for the society, because now you're capitalizing on the intellectual capacity of half of your population. So you have to have a shift in bias on what family care is and who the primary family care provider is, and a shift for both men and women in how we view the leaders. When you look at the occupations around the world, women have, in most countries, steadily increased the percentages in different career fields. Where the numbers have flattened out is in leadership positions. So in my country, for example, in financial management, the banking sector, women are now the predominant number of employees, but they are still minuscule when it comes to being something like the bank, the head of SEC, or the treasury leader. So we will have to start thinking about and more openly talking about how we view women as both men and women, and understand that women are leaders and can very much take a military unit, diplomacy, finance, or a country to success.
And be like Chief Jones.
And be like Rebecca Jones, absolutely.
Can we ask our other fellow, we've just got one more fellow and then I'll open it up for you to ask a question. We've got Sandhya Das to ask a question, please.
Minister, as someone who has reached the senior-most ranks of public office in India, it's quite respectable that you've never been afraid of speaking your mind, particularly at a time when it's quite hard to go against status quo and when women do face greater public scrutiny. So Minister and Admiral Howard, I would welcome your thoughts as well. What advice would you give the next generation of women leaders to stay true to what they believe in, what's right, given these challenges?
Admiral, you want to go?
So it's, if I may, I'd like to push back a little on the premise in your question. So when we use words like these tough times, you know, literally, if we went back 100 years, women around the world were agitating for their right to vote. They were willing to be jailed. They were willing to take physical beatings so that they could have an individual right that should be a right naturally of all citizens. We should look to the past sometimes and take confidence from the women who've gone before us and just be persistent and be bold about what we want to achieve.
You know, it's a bit interesting. Every time I'm on a platform which addresses gender issues, I always see that women ask for advice on what they should do better or how they should face certain circumstances over a period of time. I have never seen a congregation of men standing and asking for that advice. So I think the biggest service we can do to ourselves is stop looking for that advice from other women. We are independent enough, strong enough to lead our way ourselves. Another issue, you would very rightfully said in your question to the gentleman from Hindustan Times, every time, even in the media, though we have a lot of women today who are in responsible positions, a woman who has a degree of success, when media interacts with that lady, one of the first things that she is told, in fact, my apologies, Ashokji is seated here in the audience, how do you manage to balance everything, your life and your profession and your family? I said, you never ask a man that. In Hindi, we say, aapke bachcho ko kaun dekhta hai? And who looks after your kids? A male journalist asked me that once, and I said, aapke bachcho ko kaun dekhta hai? Who looks after yours? So these are the stereotypes in which, irrespective of the age, we are still stuck in. So we see celebrated women or successful women, and it is incumbent on the younger lot to ask us for advice. So I think the best thing that you can do for yourself is start listening to yourself. Because the best advice my mother gave me is that no matter what happens in your life, good or bad, you bear the consequences of it. So make damn sure that you're the one taking that decision, because you don't want to bear someone else's cross. So my advice, speak to yourself, hear yourself, take the best of ideas from around you, but you lead your life on your terms because you bear the consequences of it.
Indeed. We've got a question just here.
Thank you very much. Waited long for this question, the opportunity. I couldn't help myself. I just wanted to come and share this, my experience with you. I had the privilege of being the commandant of the Officers Training Academy at Chennai from 2008 to 2010. And that's the only academy where women officers are being trained for the Indian Army. So here I have about 150 women, young women, college graduates who come and joined in. So my advice to them was, look, as far as I'm concerned, you are officers under training. I do not genderize you, and I don't make a distinction between you and the other guy. I always call them women. I said, you please make a distinction between a woman and a lady. For me, you are women, women of substance. So I can't put that as an abbreviation because they were called lady cadets LC. So I said, I don't want to call you WC because that has a different connotation. Anyway, in my tenure there, the women started with their full 11 months of training, and the first course passed out in 2009. And the president, then president, Pratibha Devi Patil, she was there on the passing out parade. And the sword of honor went to a gentleman, but the gold medal was a woman cadet who received it. At the end of my tenure, there was, I had groomed them adequately, so I had the privilege of ensuring that I just left before the passing out parade, but there was a woman officer who got the sword of honor. So it is we who are not treating them at par. They are there to deliver. But I had a word of advice to the young men, gentlemen cadets. I said, if this is the quality of women coming to the army, I feel that your future is threatened because they are far superior to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm being told that I have to wrap up and end it here, but we'll take one last quick brief question from you, sir, and then I'm sorry, we're going to have to wrap this session up.
Do you think that strong leaders have made a difference almost overnight to emancipate women in the sense that we are talking? Habib Bourguiba, the strong man of Tunisia, today in the Arab world, in the constitution, Tunisian women have equal rights. They are better represented in the parliament than anybody else. Turkey, Kemal Ataturk. And now look what the king of Morocco is doing. First, get them out in their suppression. He says, from next week, no burqas will be fabricated in the land or imported. So strong men do make a difference. In the Central Asian republics, education literacy is 96%. And when you ask the ambassadors, they say we owe it to the Soviet Union. So strong men at the top or strong women at the top can make a difference and cover the gap of decades into 1 decade. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panelists for this very robust discussion here. Thank you.